Good evening. I'm speaking today with Jehan Perera from the National Peace Council. Jehan, very warm welcome to the program. Talking about Sri Lanka today is, where do you begin and where do you end? But you have been active in promoting peace in this country for decades, not just a couple of years. Where are we today in relation to all those years you've been working in the field?
Well, that's a hard question.
But a necessary one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think we are coming to the end of the military phase, the large-scale military phase, the large-scale war. And I think that the LTTE is very close to defeat in that sense. But the work goes on because the military defeat of the LTTE does not mean that the type of thinking that inspired the LTTE and which sustained the LTTE over these many years will come to an end. So there will be a lot of need to engage in reform of the country, of the polity. Reform the causes so that the causes that gave rise to the LTTE are addressed. Because if we fail to do that, then my fear is that the LTTE will be able to retain a presence in Sri Lanka as a guerrilla movement, a terrorist movement that can cause a lot of damage for a long time to come. Not as a conventional army, not in the sense of capturing territory again. I think that is going to be very difficult for a comeback on the part of the LTTE. But they can be a very big spoiler element because behind the LTTE will be the Tamil diaspora and also the sense of grievance of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. Unless their sense of being unjustly treated in this country is addressed by the government.
We'll come back to that, but maybe a personal question. It's not easy being a peace activist today, and perhaps it never has been, but arguably more difficult today than sometimes in the past. What motivated you to come into this field, Jehan, and stay in it, I suppose?
Yeah. I started thinking about this conflict and writing on it when I was a student in the university.
Here?
No, I studied in America.
Right.
I did my high school work here, but thereafter I got scholarships to Pakistan and subsequently to America. And when I used to come back on my vacations, when I read the newspapers, I could see this problem growing because this was in the late 70s. And I always felt that there was another side that many people were missing, that especially my friends, my family, were missing out on, because at that time in the late 70s, we saw this problem as terrorism. Everyone called it a terrorist problem. And yet when I spoke to Tamils who were close to my family or who were personal friends, I saw that they had a different point of view. One example was Senator Nadesan, S. Nadesan QC, a very honorable man who was not a supporter of terrorism or violence. But talking to him, I could see that he felt that that the Tamil people had not been treated fairly, that there was another side, that, for instance, when there were cultural shows showing what Sri Lanka was, that the Tamil culture was not adequately represented in those cultural shows of the Sri Lankan state or of Sri Lankan dance troupes or whatever.
So a sense of marginality.
Yeah, and that my argument that, well, the Sinhalese are 75%, and so 75% of the cultural show should be Sinhalese, it did not convince him, and I could see that there was a point. And that is what actually motivated me, the sense that there was another side to our conflict that many people were not seeing, which I needed to highlight or talk about. And I had the advantage, I think, of being abroad and therefore being a little detached from the controversy in our country. So that's what actually started me thinking about it. And then when I came back to Sri Lanka, I joined the Sarvodaya movement because I believed in development from below, and that economic development was the most important. I felt that Sri Lanka was a two-tier society with a very well-to-do class of people like myself, the class that I belong to, as well as a large population which was marginalized. And I wanted to work in that area and bridge that divide, that gap. And then I saw that all the work that Sarvodaya was doing at the grassroots, trying to build up the economy, was being wiped away by the war. And then I saw that this was the area that maybe I could make a contribution to.
When you say that people at the grassroots level have been disempowered or economically impoverished on account of the war, is that would you like to qualify that, in terms of what you have seen on the ground?
I think our political leaders are really to blame. Our leaders are to blame, and the politicians, because those who go into politics go and take up positions of leadership. They're very powerful, and they are the ones then who form opinions in our country. In a way, it is unfair to blame all the people. Sometimes we say we get the leaders we deserve, and we are all to blame for what's happened. But I think our political leaders are the ones, because they are the ones who have power. They are the ones who have the opportunity to form the minds of other people to a much, much greater degree than anyone else. For instance, civil society. I mean, I have worked now in civil society for 25 years. And I know the very limited direct impact people like us have, because when we speak, when we organize, say in my organization, when we organize a seminar, I mean, we reach 30 people, 40 people. But when a politician speaks, he reaches millions. And he has access to the state media, very powerful. So I would put the blame squarely on politicians, primarily. And I would say that the basic reason for our inability to solve this problem is that we have confused this idea of majority rule with democracy. Majority rule is democracy, but it is not the only criteria of democracy, especially not where one community or one nation is a majority, is a big majority, 75%. Then what we get is, we get a permanent majority. On any issue that is ethnically divisive, we have a permanent majority. And what our country is struggling to find is how to balance democracy based on majority rule with justice and fair play by minorities who will always be permanent minorities, how to enable them to have a share of power.
But of course, this is an argument never really done or finished with. I mean, it is a continuous process of fashioning that ideal state where we might all aspire to live as equals without the ill effects of what you just mentioned. But perhaps impeding this, Jehan, you would agree, has been the fact that there has been terrorism in the country, and that these have been huge impediments to our democratic progress. Now that one, as you quite correctly suggested, we might be seeing the end of it, might that be an opportunity for civil society, not just political society, but civil society, to take up some of the issues that you said and then go forward with that?
Yes, very true. And this is the time when civil society must start doing work. But I'm afraid that this time the environment is not at all conducive to civil society actually coming out and speaking about what should be. I'm not sure where the lines are drawn and whose line I'll be crossing. And but nevertheless, it is our duty to try and go as far as we possibly can. But I think that if we are to reach a better place, a better future, then the government has to liberalize. It has to give greater space to dissenting views. And I fear that at this time, the government is not giving any space, very little space